Hello and welcome to KellyApy, a self-help podcast. Well, today's episode is about sober living. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in a household devoted to helping you stay clean and sober? I know I have. I thought this would be a great topic to explore this week, and I have the perfect person to talk about it. My friend Comea has been living in the sober living community for a while and has firsthand knowledge of the advantages and disadvantages of immersing yourself in a sober environment while trying to get clean and sober. She's agreed to come on the show today to talk about sober living lifestyle to help others consider making this move. Please welcome Comea. Welcome, Comea. We're so glad you could join us today.
Hello.
So listen, Comea, let's just jump right to it. We're talking about sober living today. Tell us a little bit about your experience. How did you come across sober living and what made you decide? Because you've been living at sober living for a while, so you have a lot of experience when it comes to sober living. So just so my audience can kind of understand your story, you want to share with us a little bit about how you came to sober living?
Sure. I entered into an inpatient treatment program in April of 2019. And by the time I got to that point, I did not have a safe space to live. So at the end of my tenure there, one of the things that, most residential facilities will help you do is to try to find a safe place to transition to if you don't have like a home or a family situation to move back to. I had burned that bridge with my family, so that wasn't going to be an option for me. And so I was introduced to the concept of sober living. At first I was resistant because the idea of living with a bunch of strangers just scared the crap out of me.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, I got my fair share of anxiety and other things,
Sure.
welcome to the party. Right. But, I really didn't have many options. And, I was unemployed. I didn't have a place to live. And so, just coming out of treatment, what I didn't want to do was have to revert to old behaviors, old situations, getting myself in a living situation that was unsafe or unhealthy or homeless.
Yeah.
None of those things are necessarily conducive to the recovery experience that I was trying to pursue.
How long, can I quickly ask, how long were you in treatment for, in the inpatient for?
67 days in a 45-day program.
You got the bonus.
They offered it to me, and I'm just in a space where I was just open to suggestions. So I was making some big moves in my trauma recovery, and it was a good decision. I stopped being resistant to suggestions and just started to listen to what other options were there for me, because I was sick of living the way that I had been living.
Yeah, you had to kind of be open-minded. That definitely needs to be a factor in this whole situation. And, I think you bring up a good point because, a lot of people come out of treatment and they don't know what to do with themselves because they're in that safe haven of treatment and rehab for that time. And then all of a sudden they're getting kicked out of the nest and they're like, where do I go now? What do I do? So I can see exactly where you're coming from, because you don't want to, like you said, get thrown back into the same environment you were necessarily in before that you were, active in your addiction, right?
Yeah, and even sometimes people's family situation isn't the most healthy. Some folks are living with other people that are also in active addiction and just are not ready to make that move for themselves. And so, it gives you a space to be able to focus on yourself, along with other people who are on the same journey as you, whose goal is the same as you.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different options, and we can talk about whatever you would like to. I got out of treatment in June 2019, and I've lived at the same, I live in an Oxford house, which is one of the different types of sober livings. There's a couple hundred in North Carolina, so there's quite a lot available, and there's over 1,000. I couldn't give you the exact number off the top of my head, but there's quite a few and continuing to grow, because that's one of the models of the Oxford program, is that and one of the reasons that I like the option, there's no time limit for how long you can live there. There's some folks that live in Oxford in my area who have been there for 10 years.
And is Oxford national, or is it just in North Carolina here?
It's national. It's national.
Okay. So they're all over the place. And what made you decide to go into Oxford versus some of the other places?
Well, at the time, the options that were out there for me were pretty limited in terms of what's available in my area. For myself, I didn't want to go into one of the sort of religious ones. It just wasn't something that appealed to me. And certain programs, certain inpatient treatment programs have transitional housing that's associated with them specifically. So you basically graduate out of the inpatient into like an apartment or some sort of shared space where you have more freedom. At the time, the facility that I went to didn't have that. They still don't have one on site, but they work. I went to Carolina Center for Recovery in Charlotte. Love them. They
Yeah,
saved my
they're
life.
great. They're great.
Fantastic. And they work very closely with Anchor of Hope Sober Living, which is its own private entity. Now, it did not have a women's house when I got out of treatment. So now he's the owner and operator, Josh Bone, has a couple in operation, and women's houses. He has several men's houses. And so for me, Oxford was the better choice. I liked that the requirements, I was going to be able to go into a house that without having a job right away, without necessarily having any money right away. And that was huge. Not every house is able to do that, right? So one of the things about Oxford is that the houses are self-supporting. They are democratically run. So there's no manager. There's no specific program. We have a set of rules and accountability standards that we follow. And then Oxford itself has, its own traditions. And so you have like some standard rules that applies pretty much across the board. You can move from one house to the other. Like I know a guy who moved from Kansas to Charlotte and just came from one Oxford and moved into another in Charlotte.
Okay.
And excuse me. And so they have a standard set of rules. And for women's housing, there's two types of houses. There's just a standard women's house and then a women and children's house.
Okay.
The primary difference is that with the women's and children's houses, it's a little bit more tight with the rules in terms of being able to have guests and stuff like that. And for me, that was huge. I didn't want to have to worry about a roommate having a romantic partner coming to hang out, in our space.
Yeah.
You do get that you do have those kind of options. In the first 30 days, you have more of a restricted options. You don't get overnights. You have to be home at an earlier curfew time. After that first 30 days, and as long as you are up to date with your rent and not on any kind of accountability contract that would deem differently, you can have overnights. So
when you've got did they put you in a house, or did you get to like take a look at the houses and find the one you wanted to move into, or did they just say, okay, we've got availability in this house? And
so there's a website for Oxford. It's oxfordvacancies.com. You go and it will show you all the houses in your area that are available. You can search by zip code, city, state, if you want to go somewhere different. So I picked from a list, and basically you don't just get admitted in, you have to interview for the house, and the housemates basically ask you, there's a pretty standard set of questions, and then you get some that are just individual questions based on the conversation you have with the people.
Okay. Yeah. So you got to, that makes total sense, because you want to make sure that if you're moving into a new scene, everybody gets along and everybody can coexist well together.
Yeah. And I have a service animal as well. And so that was an issue that, I have access obviously with wherever with her, but I wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be something problematic. Cause the one thing I was looking for, with stability. I had moved so many times over the past couple of years prior to treatment. I was looking for a home, and Oxford has given me that. So
Mhm.
I did my interview, and it was just over the phone because I was still an inpatient. You can
Mhm.
do phone or in-person interviews depending on what the house prefers and what's available. And they asked me a whole lot of different questions, just about myself, about my experience, whether I had any sort of legal issues that I was dealing with. They ask you about how you get along, how you deal with constructive criticism, and what type of medications I take, things like that.
Mhm.
So you can't be on controlled substances in Oxford unless you're on a medically assisted treatment program. So they do. I can be on my mental health meds, but I
Mhm.
can't be on like a controlled substance. Like there's no taking Xanax, for any.
Oh, okay, like narcotics or anything like that. Okay.
Correct,
Yeah,
correct.
yeah,
It's
of
very
course.
restrictive. Now, there are certain situations, some folks with severe ADHD and also folks that are coming off opiates use medically assisted treatment and take things like Suboxone or
Oh, yeah.
methadone. So those are totally okay,
Mhm.
um, as long as it's a medically assisted treatment program. So it can't just be like a random doctor prescribing it. It has to be through a specific doctor, and you're held accountable for those things. They get counted unless you're getting distribution at the place. Some folks, the MAT programs make you go there to take your meds. So, but
Mhm.
if you get take home meds, then those get counted by the house. You keep them in a lockbox. You're responsible for them. So
And the
it's
house, so the tenants in the house make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, because you said
absolutely.
there's no like house manager or anything like that.
No, but I mean, everybody kind of has a say, and that's a beautiful thing, right? You don't have one person that is kind of running things away. It's everyone has a voice. Um, that makes a huge difference when, especially when issues arise, between folks, because you have a set of standards that you live by, and that's for my house. I can only really speak specifically for how my house operates, but we stick to the rules when it comes to issues or situations. We just revert. What does the rule say? What do the rules say? It makes it a lot easier. It takes personalities out of it. And then there's just certain things that are totally not acceptable. Obviously, like total sobriety is required. So
Mhm.
there's absolutely zero tolerance for drug or alcohol use. You get
Mhm.
drug tested when you come in, and you can get randomly drug tested at any time.
Okay.
And that was a layer of accountability that I definitely wanted in the
Yeah.
beginning. And then, you're responsible. You have chores that you have to do, and they get assigned. And one of the neat things about Oxford too is that you have a house meeting. Most sober livings do this too. You have like a weekly house meeting, whether it's with a house manager or um, or just the residents. But that's pretty common amongst sober living. But at Oxford, we have a weekly house meeting, and there are like house positions. So we have someone that is the treasurer, basically is keeping a checkbook. We have someone who takes care of, it's called comptroller. They're basically keeping track of people's rent, like what they've paid, what they owe, that type of stuff. You have a secretary who's taking notes at the meeting. I mean, it's kind of cool because people that have never had experience doing something like writing checks or keeping a checkbook or doing a budget, we do it together as a house. We learn together if it's something that we haven't had experience. And so the folks that do know how to do those things are able to teach people, and no one holds a particular position for more than 6 months at a time.
So what happens if there is a conflict that arises, which I'm imagining in the time that you've been there, that's happened, on several occasions, because people living together, it's going to happen. Uh, how does the house go about resolving it? Like, do they hold court? What do you do to,
Kind of come to that. No, there's a couple levels to it, right? So we definitely encourage people to work things out. So if someone has an issue with their housemate, for with their roommate, for example, um, I have the privilege of being in a single room now. basically I have lived there long enough that when that person moved out, I was the next in line essentially.
Mhm.
But most folks will have a roommate. And so, that happens sometimes. People get on each other's nerves, or one person is really clean and the other one's a little messy. So initially we encourage them to try to work it out themselves. Sometimes it doesn't always work well, right? You don't always get to pick your roommate. If there's only one bed available and you move in, you're going to that bed. So, in those situations, then you have a person, it's designated that the president is the like peer mediator essentially. So you have a house president, they're not in charge, right? They're just a go-to person. um Anybody can be the president, like I said, it's not, nobody's in charge, but typically the president is someone with more tenure, or has been there for a little while. um or you can bring it to the house meeting and then everybody kind of hears both sides and then you talk it out as a house. Sometimes people struggle with, they're just not good at talking to someone and setting boundaries, for example, or, you know, saying something in a way that they don't feel is hurtful because they've never had to model that behavior. It hasn't been modeled for them. So, we talk it out and we do a really good job. It's there's no raised voices. If people get upset, they gotta take a minute and walk away. I just hit a button, sorry.
That's okay, but that's all part of the learning experience of living a sober lifestyle too. It's
Absolutely.
not, it's more than just staying away from the drugs and the alcohol. It's learning how to be a part and uh, have healthy boundaries and live in society, with sober ideals.
Yeah, and it helps people to understand, decision making, and it helps them to understand conflict resolution in a way that is healthy. So many different people, so many different backgrounds have come through. We got people that come into Oxford straight out of prison. We have people that come in off, from homelessness. We got some folks that come out of treatment. I mean, all walks of life. And some folks, I've had people that have moved in that had some sobriety, but just based on, situations that happened, they couldn't afford to live, by themselves anymore. And so rather than be homeless, they chose to move into an Oxford to help them stay sober. So the only requirement is that you participate in your recovery by attending 12-step meetings.
Oh, okay. So that's one of the requirements, is that you, once you enter these, you have to go to 12-step meetings, I guess, based on whatever your addiction is. Is that correct?
Yeah, and you have so many that you have to go to a week. You have a larger requirement, when you're first there, or if the house dictates it. I mentioned a couple times behavior contracts. So in situations where people are repeating behaviors that are negative behaviors, we don't want to just kick people out, right? Our goal is to try to help people grow instead of have them go. That's like a little rhyme we
Mhm.
say sometimes. Like, we'd much rather them, get better and learn instead of just put them out to the street, because you and I know, like, you get back on the street, that's going to increase the likelihood that you get yourself into some situations that are not good for us.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So what are some of the like rules of the house? Like you said, you have to attend the 12-step recovery meetings. What other rules do they have that you have to follow?
So you have a curfew. It's it for the first 30 days, or anytime you're on what's called newcomer status, which means you're in your first 30 days or you owe money. Then you have to attend 5 meetings a week and you have an earlier curfew. You
And what would the
can
curfew be like, around what, like eight
Sunday through
o'clock?
Thursday is 11,
Oh,
and then
okay.
yeah, it's not.
I'm like thinking of like
Well,
eight, you get in the
there's a
house
lot
at
of
8 o'clock.
there's a lot of freedom. So I mean, there does have to be some commitment and some willingness yourself to stick to it, because you know you're allowed to live your life here. You just have some extra rules that other folks don't. But then, Friday and Saturday you have midnight curfew. Once you are off newcomer status, then like my curfew is 2 a.m.
Woo.
So I never stay out that late anymore. You know,
I know. I'm just turning over in bed at
like
that point.
if I'm awake at midnight, I'm like, woo, you know, so.
Listen, if I'm awake at 8 o'clock these days.
Then we have a whiteboard that has everybody's name written and their phone number. It also has slots. So if I'm in, I have a magnet by in, work, overnight, or just out. And that's part of that is accountability, and part of that is safety. You know, if something happens, we need to make sure that, like for example, a fire, we have, you know, we have a fire safety plan in place so that we make sure that everybody gets out. My house is a women and children's house, so um, you can't have guests in your room, um, which, you know, it's something I chose that, you know, and it's basically to be a more protected environment because there are kids living there. But the just a women's house with no children living there, you can have guests as long as your roommate approves. If someone spends the night with you, then it counts as your overnight, and you have to be, you know, you have to be off your newcomer status. And
Oh, so you can have like overnights. So you
yeah,
could
after
like if you
your first 30 days, yeah,
oh, okay, so you get lots more freedom as that happens and stuff.
yeah.
So you're okay, that's good. Now, what about like the food situation? Do you all chip in for food and cook, or how does
So
that?
so every house is a little bit different with that. Because we have, my house holds 8 women, and currently 2 of them have children living there. So um you know, we have so many different schedules that trying to come together is really tough, but we do like a family, we call it like family dinner. We do it when we do our house meeting. So we chip in, sometimes we cook, sometimes we, you know, get takeout. You know, we just had Chinese last week, we had pizza the week before. And it
Mhm.
just gives us a time to kind of sit around and bond, because it's very rare that everyone's home all at the same time.
Okay. Now we were talking recently about, and this is kind of what brought it to the top of my mind because I was at a 12-step meeting and one of the girls was interested in the Oxford House, and because she wanted to see if they gave rides, and you responded that they don't give rides, but they give like ways to help you get around and
Yeah,
help
so
you do.
most Oxfords, at least in this area, are right at or very close to bus lines. During the winter, typically the our chapter, which uh, in a given area, they divide the houses into clusters called chapters. And then, you know, you have monthly meetings with the other houses in your chapter just to be holding the houses accountable.
Mhm.
So not just on a small level, but on a larger level, we look out for each other to make sure that, you know, if folks are having trouble at one house, I've done service at other houses plenty of times, going into a house with, for example, all new members and nobody knows how to do anything. So you go and you teach them how to do this stuff, and how to run things appropriately. But as far as rides go, I mean, you're pretty much on your own. I put a lot of miles on my legs when I first moved in, just
Mhm.
walking everywhere. But you know, sometimes people give you rides, but it's not something to expect. You know, so it's definitely a luxury if you have people at the house that have vehicles, and sometimes people will give you rides, sometimes they won't, but it's not a requirement. There are lots of managed sober livings that do have some sort of program, or um, some sort of transportation, at least to meetings and to work or to interviews. So they help you get to there. So, you know, for my house, it's about half and half. Half the girls have vehicles, half don't, and they use the bus line, you know.
Mhm. And so with different sober living houses, I guess depending on the one you go to, they do have different programs built in to help you get that leg up in society again. And
Yeah, there I know a couple that are specific in Charlotte, at least, that, and they usually will tell you. I know Sober Living of America and Anchor of Hope both have programs where they will help you get to meetings and to doctor appointments and to like job interviews. I can't say for sure with Anchor of Hope if they do like to work on a regular basis, but I know they make sure that you're able to. They at least partner with other people in the house, something like that. Again, it's a managed sober living, so you have someone that's, facilitating all of that and making those arrangements. With Sober Living of America, they have 2 tiers of programming, and so their higher tier programming offers transportation as well as counseling and some extra things. It's more of a residential housing. It's almost like an intensive outpatient kind of thing, but
Mhm.
it's not an inpatient facility. But it has a price tag. So
Oh
uh,
yeah. So that's the thing. What's speaking of the price tag, what are like the price ranges for these, when you move in, obviously they know you don't have much money and you're just getting on your feet. So I'm sure they work out with you an arrangement, right?
well, you're still responsible for, so every Oxford is $100 move-in fee. As far as I'm aware, it's the same all across. And if you leave and come back, it's the same. You pay that $100 again. And then rent ranges from 130 to about 170. It depends on a number of things. A newer house is going to have, and when I say newer, I don't mean like newly built, but newly converted into Oxford,
Mhm.
because there is some cost associated with getting it up and running. Buying all the things it needs, that type of stuff. My They call it EES, which is equal expense shared. I pay $130 a week, and it includes all my utilities. That includes all the cleaning supplies, all the paper products for the house, and also coffee.
Well, we need
Gotta have that.
that's a given.
Right. But I mean, there's nowhere in this city that I could live for that price.
Yeah.
And my house, like how many people live in the house depends on the size of the house. So smaller houses are not going to have as many women as my house does. We have 6 bedrooms, plus we have a dining room and playroom and a living room and a large kitchen and a giant deck in the back door. Like, it's a nice house.
Right.
Definitely for, where I was coming from, it's the nicest place I've lived in a long time,
Mhm.
outside my parents' house. But um yeah, so it's, and then of course upkeep is up to us, right? If we're not holding our peers accountable, a house can get messy really quickly, right? Because it's a lot of people living together. But we do a good job of that. And if you break rules, I mean, you pay fines because money money makes sense to us. So
Yeah. What are the fines, like $25 or something like that?
they range depending on what the things are. So safety fines, stuff like leaving the door unlocked, for example, or not cleaning the lint trap because it's a fire hazard. Those get the bigger fine, the 25. But like not doing your chore on time, you pay $10. You don't do your dishes, you pay. It's actually like $4 a dish. I think it's crazy, but it's crazy only if you're not doing the stuff. It doesn't. I know for me, I've gotten the door fine a couple times, and then I learned really quick.
Yeah, well,
You
that's
won't
just
forget that.
exactly it. Money's going to talk, especially, for somebody who's trying to get back on their feet again. So we're coming close to the end really quick. I want to just kind of just see if there's any specific, if somebody decides they're listening to this podcast, they said, oh, this sounds really interesting. What should they do? What are their next steps? Would you tell them to do, Camilla?
Well, definitely. I mean, if you have a particular area that you're looking in, as far as Oxford, I mentioned the website before, oxfordvacancies.com. It'll allow you to search for the type of house, whether it's men, women, or women with children. And you can look for houses that have vacancies, all through the United States. And then you just call to set up an interview. It's as simple as that. You can Google the houses, and it'll show you what the house looks like from the outside, so you can see, the area that it's in and stuff and things like that. But you can literally just search for sober living, um, and find different places, but make sure you read kind of the small print, right? Because some places have limits. That's one thing I love That's kind of the difference between like a standard halfway house. They have time limits. You can only stay there for X amount of time, then you got to go. Oxford is like, well, everybody recovers at different rates. Some people might be ready to go sooner than other people. You know, for me, I feel like I'm ready to live on my own, but the housing market in my
Oh
city
yeah.
is
It's
insane.
ridiculous. Yeah. No, it's not.
Insane. And so why go through the process of moving in with new roommates when I have roommates that I love and care about that are kind of my extended family already?
Yeah, perfect. So, last thing I'm going to do here as we close up, I like to have everyone, all my guests, leave with a message of hope to help and heal the listeners out there. So, Comea, what's your message to the person who is thinking about moving into sober living, but maybe a little scared? What do you tell them?
Well, one of my favorite quotes is Albus Dumbledore, the wisest of men. It says, happiness can be found even in the darkest of times if one only remembers to turn on the light. If you're ready to make a change, you don't have to go through treatment to move into sober living. It's essentially you're turning the light on. You're scared, you don't know what to do next. It's a start. And maybe it doesn't work for you and you relapse and you recognize, hey, maybe I need to go do something like treatment instead. But it's available, and the people that I live with, they care about me. They care about me getting healthy. And I can't even begin to explain how much I've grown just through the example of the women that I've lived with. So just turn on the light.
Oh, that's great. That's such a great. I forgot. I know you're a big Harry Potter fan.
I'm a big nerd in general. It's like, do I go with the wisdom of Lord of the Rings or do I go with Harry Potter?
Me too. Well, I'm going to close with a quote that I found when I was looking for quotes. This is from an anonymous author, but this one says, I chose sober because I wanted a better life. I stayed sober because I got one. And it sure sounds like that's the case with you, Comea. So I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experience, strength, and hope with all the listeners out there. I think it's going to be very helpful to a lot of people. I know I've learned a lot.
That's good. I'm glad you asked me.
Well, I want to also thank our listeners for tuning in to KellyApy today. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure you subscribe. We're going to be doing this for a half an hour each week. And if you'd like more positive messages, check out our YouTube vlog, Monday Messages, hosted by me, Kelly Mahoney. Hope you have a great week. We'll see you next week for another edition of KellyApy. Bye.